Hello, 200. Good to see you again, Dr. Allen. After a week off of the video filming, I'm sure that really crushed all of you not to have to see my face on this if you're watching videos like you should be. Um, but on the positive, I've seen a lot of you a lot in the last couple weeks, whether it be through advising or get togethers on the sessions and things like that. So, hey, that's all good. That's actually the important stuff. I think just to make sure we can address questions and you're all, it looks like the work you're all doing is fantastic. So, I mean, I'm talking outside of this classroom. So, you know, all awesome stuff. I'm going to take a moment and kind of clean up some nuts and bolts stuff to make sure we're all on the same page. One, I saw a lot of you this week related to the juncture praxis at TPA kind of info session. I know it was a little informal, but I did record that. I'm going to post those materials up with this week's materials. I'm recording this on October 29th, but it will be obviously for the following week. So I will put that there. Second, I will apologize if you were planning on coming to the Google Classroom training session. The gentleman from Jefferson County Public Schools, he's awesome. He probably might even explain it if you're planning on coming to the rescheduled session. But it just something came up literally about an hour and a half before the session, and it was unavoidable. Nothing, it's all fine and everything, but I think he can explain it if he wants to when we get together. That is an optional thing, but I will give you service hours because I really think it would be beneficial for you to see some of the Google Classroom stuff, especially if you're going into Jefferson or Washington County in the future because they use Google Classroom. I will give you service hours for that. If you don't come, that's fine. But if you can, I sent out the announcement this week, but it is on November 5th at 2 o'clock. And if you can make it, that's awesome. I think you'll pick up some stuff. Next thing, I kind of told everyone when I saw them, and I've seen some of you for advisement, but make sure you're kind of keeping an eye out on what classes you need for your juncture. I'm sure your cooperating teacher, your advisor, is taking care of you on that. They are more knowledgeable sometimes than I am on a lot of things, especially those crafty veterans. But just make sure you're keeping an eye out on the 320 is the next progression in that and such. Some of you I know are doing 360. It's all good. Just make sure you're keeping an eye on that juncture. But 320 is when you have to have for juncture 100%. So if you're eyeing juncture or applying for juncture next semester, make sure you talk to your advisor. With that being said, I think we're on a good pace. We got some stuff that we're going to do today. I'll pull it up here in a second. I'll share my screen. Everyone again's been doing great work. Oh, one other thing, service learning hours. A lot of you came to the Chinese versus Western approach sessions, which actually I was only planning on doing one of those, but it seemed like a lot of people were coming to a few. I thought there was a lot to get out of that if you want to really deep dive into it. I posted some questions. I think I told everyone that came to those. When you do your write-ups, and I'm going to do a little video on the write-ups because they're going to be a little quirky this semester because COVID, what do you do? But, I put some things that you might want to look for. And I know some of you are doing tutoring. That's fantastic. I know some of you have got coaching. That's all well and good. And also, if anyone thinks of anything, I'm actually going to do a few things differently, I think, in the spring. Nothing that you all been fantastic, just because now I kind of get to feel for 200 a little bit because Dr. Hannah's not going to be back. So if you think of anything you'd like to talk about in 200, just feel free to email me. I am open to some interpretations. We're mostly a historical beginnings of foundations philosophy type class. Speaking of philosophy, I put something last week during the catch-up week on Rousseau. He is something I find very interesting. He kind of gets into a lot of the child needs to develop through experience type thing. It's way centuries before Dewey comes into play, Piaget, all those guys. So I kind of liked it. That's a podcast. I know it's a little of a nerdy podcast. I enjoy it, but it may not be your cup of tea. But I think they break down the whole thing on his works and his writings about education. There are flaws in it in that a lot of times his idea of education is always more tutoring or 101. But at the end of the day, teaching's teaching. And I think he raises some good points, and you can maybe see the natural progression to like people like Piaget and Dewey. Also, Dewey discussion boards are great. Just make sure you're putting a little meat on the bones. I've probably made a comment on that on a few people. If you just need a little more than like a sentence or two, you got to, do a little bit of a deep dive on Dewey. I know he's not writing a fictional novel. I mean, it's, it was written in the 1920s, but still kind of pull out what you think's important. And by the way, don't overanalyze it either. He's probably literally saying what you think he's kind of getting into. And a lot of you were nailing things like, the experience is not only for the student, it's also for the teacher. A lot of people made that point, which was actually fantastic. And it's that hands-on learning. Rousseau got into that if you listen to the podcast. Piaget gets into that. It's learning through experience, through experiment, things like that. Nailing that on the discussion board. So now, with all that being said, I'm actually going to share my screen. If you've had a chance to actually look at the syllabus, sorry, I'm going to pull up a few things here. A little bit of Piaget there, and that's not what I want. We're just going to go with it. We're doing one take. I hadn't already signed in, but I'm going to do it now. I'm going to move my face from Zoom, and I'm going to sign in. Give you a play-by-play here is what I'm doing. All right, if you look here on the syllabus, I believe this week actually has something related to Vygotsky. We've actually kind of talked a little bit about Vygotsky. Now, whether you remember that we talked about Vygotsky, I don't know. I'm actually going to expand on that a little bit because there's someone that I was a little disappointed in myself that I didn't talk about or have listed on the syllabus, and I'm actually going to update the syllabus this week and put him on there because that's who I'm going to focus on most of this lecture. But if you remember, we're going to look at Vygotsky just for a few minutes. We're going to kind of do a little refresher on Piaget, and then I'm going to talk about Bloom's taxonomy, which honestly, that's probably something that you're going to see a lot more of, more than anything when you go out in the field of anything that I've mentioned in terms of Piaget, Vygotsky, Brunner, Rousseau, Dewey. You'll probably hear the term Bloom's a lot more than you'll hear any of those guys. If I'm really just cutting to the chase. And also, as you get into 320 and 360, a lot of the people that we're just kind of mentioning in here, you're going to get into a much bigger deep dive into. But we have that. Also, the readings, and I hope maybe you'll catch this. I don't have the list right in front of me, but I have been trying to look at the editions because people have a couple different editions of the book, trying to get readings that are posted. One that I have up this week related to the one that's listed on the syllabus is actually our single-sex schools and classes effective. I think that's actually kind of an interesting study and whether students do better when it's just male, female types of settings. There's a lot of different thought processes on that. It's interesting if I can spit that out. So take a look at that. I will have alternative readings if that one is not in the book that you have, and I'll make sure that those are up. Don't forget you have your Dewey discussion board that's related to chapters 5 and 6. The Dewey discussion boards have been great. I've enjoyed reading them. I got through all the 1s and 2s. I'm working on the 3s and 4s. And that's kind of what we're going to do this week. I am just going to lightly touch back on Vygotsky, and I'm actually going to mention Piaget, and then I'm going to talk about Benjamin Bloom a little bit, and we'll kind of call it a day. So let's rock and roll. Just in case you're remembering, and this is more just a refresher, but I feel like I need to make sure you've heard this, and I'll have it up under the notes. But Vygotsky was the guy, if you remember, that talked about the zone of proximal development. And it was that concept, it was in there, actually the lady on the Democratic Classroom talked about it a little bit. It's that concept of what can the students do on their own, and what can they do with help, and then what can't they do. The zone of proximal development or proximity is actually that purple. And what that's getting into is this. That's your teaching. Students can do a lot of stuff. A lot of times you might do some sort of cognitive or measurement or diagnostics type exercise to see what students know. If they already know something across the board, you probably don't need to teach it. You want to focus on what they need to know as far as your content area or what you're teaching. That's the zone of proximal development. That's your scaffolding. You've probably heard that term. I've probably said that term. I don't know if I've actually defined it. I think I did one time, but just in case. Scaffolding is that it's basically your teaching. What tools are you going to use to increase the teaching or the student's knowledge of what you're trying to get them to learn. It may be your techniques, it may be things that you use as far as technology. Maybe you're trying to get students to learn. I'm going to use social studies because that's my default. I'm talking about World War One. We're talking about the causes of World War One. Maybe I'm going to use acronyms. MAIN is a very famous one: militarism, alliance system, imperialism, nationalism. Maybe I'm going to do something. Maybe I'm going to use a Kahoot. Maybe I'm going to use a Nearpod. Maybe I'm going to use anchor charts. That's, scaffolding. It's what are you doing? And you can get a little more narrow on the scaffolding definition, but I just like the idea of what am I doing, or what tools am I using in my teaching to get students to learn in this area. Maybe students know what World War One is. They don't know the causes. Now, we might get out on here like, it might be something related to, if we're talking about sixth grade, something philosophical like All's Quiet on the Western Front and the German perspective and why the trenches were dug the way they were. And, you might not, that might be a little beyond sixth grade, but the idea of why the war started is something that I think that they can know. That's in my standards in sixth grade. So how am I going to get it? So the zone of proximal development, that's Vygotsky. You'll hear that a few times probably during your studies. And probably we'll get into it a little more in 320 or 360. Vygotsky. All right. The other guy, just a refresher. I know he's been up, and that's not the one I wanted. I was trying to find a nice chart just to throw up real quick. Not literally throw up, just to put up so you could see it. And that was Piaget's stages of cognitive development. And if you remember, that was the whole thing where students, how they develop and how they learn based on where they are cognitively, age-wise. Are they more sensory motor type? They're learning through experience, through touching, grasping, things like that. That's that early stage. That pre-operational, that's that 2 to 6, 2 to 7. And again, remember, I think I mentioned this when we had Piaget a few months ago now. This is something where, these aren't hard and fast. Like this, when you turn 6, this is what happens. But that pre-operational, I just like how it says it there. It represents things with words and images, uses intuition rather than logical reasoning. That's 7 to 11. That's that concrete operational. They're thinking logically about concrete events. They're starting to grasp more concrete type analogies. But, they're starting to get a little more complex. They're understanding, I like that, mathematical transformations or, developments and figuring stuff out and operational type things. Not quite there yet, but they're getting there. And then when you get it from 12 up to adulthood, that's the formal operational. You can start to get into the critical thinking. That's Piaget's stages of cognitive development. A lot of people really like Piaget. They like this concept, and that's that idea that you'll learn through he's another one of these Deweyite kind of. It's the idea that, you're going to go through the stages and you're just going to learn through experience. All of these things are kind of formed out of experience more than anything else. And if you do think about it, when I learn, how do we mostly learn? We learn by doing. What's the old, hopefully no one learned to swim this way, but there used to be an old way, we'll just push them in the pool and they'll learn to swim. It's a little base. I'm probably oversimplifying this a little bit, but you're getting into that kind of, that way of thinking a little bit. And we learn through experience. Think about it when you do an internship or when you all do student teaching. I hear this all the time, and I agree 100%. There's the reality of the Shepherd classroom, and then there's the real reality of what classrooms are like when you're out there in the field. That could be, high school, elementary, middle school. I did that in the odd order: elementary, middle, high. That's the reality. That's through experience. That's really what you're going to learn how to teaching. And I'm sure once you go on the field, you'll hear your mentor or host teachers who are wonderful people. They'll say, well, this is the reality. That's not. It's true and it isn't true. You're getting the base level informational stuff that you need. So hopefully in this class that you can use somewhat. You won't use everything you get at Shepherd in the classroom, but I will default to them. You learn through the experience. You're going to learn how to teach and communicate. The one thing everyone's always most worried about when they teach most of the time is classroom management. It's what I worried about. I think it's what most people kind of worry about, especially when they first start. The thing about that is you learn how to be a good classroom management. You might know some techniques, which hopefully you'll pick up here at Shepherd, but at the end of the day, you learn how to use them when you're in the classroom. So, sorry, I'm off on a little bit of a tangent here. So, anyway, and there's a misspelling there. Whoops. And of course, it probably won't let me undo that. Nope, that's all right. We'll be fine. Small correction there, was recognizing. All righty. I'm going to talk a little bit about Bloom's taxonomy. This looks like there's a lot of slides. Do not worry. This is one that was actually on revision, the revised Bloom's. So I'm going to cruise a little quick because I think you'll get the concept. But anyway, actually, I think I started it right too early. Let's go back. A little bit about Bloom's taxonomy. As you can see here, that's Bloom's revised taxonomy. Benjamin Bloom was an educational theorist. He operated mostly in the Midwest. He's from Pennsylvania. And he came up with a system where what's going to happen is a lot of teachers use Bloom's taxonomy for writing objectives and looking for measurements as far as students learning. They're almost like checkpoints. So you've maybe seen it, and actually I probably should have done this, but there's always this famous thing. Sorry, I'm going to go into the world of Google here in a second. Hopefully it'll just pop right up. Bloom's taxonomy. You'll probably see something that looks like this a lot. And I'm going to just give you the overview real quick, and then I'll go to that PowerPoint and then just kind of cruise through it. But, oh, I don't like that as much. There we go. If you look there, we're just going to stick with that. There's levels. And if you think about this, this is how I think Bloom's envisioned that we would learn. There's the knowledge level, which that's your basic recall type stuff. And then it's going to just cruise right through, and I'm going to do this on the PowerPoint, until you get to evaluation. That's your major critical thinking type things. But there's words associated with each one of these. There's charts. There's all types of things. As you can see, people make tons of stuff on Bloom's. Bloom's is probably, in all honesty, is probably going to be it's going to be more the reality for you all more than anything that you're going to do in the class. I mean, that we've seen as far as theorists. It's just, I think it is. But anyway, Bloom's taxonomy. I'm not going to get into all that, but there you go. The goal is higher order thinking, and I think that's what all teachers are striving for. And again, Bloom's it was developed in the 50s. And I think 1956 was the first time that Bloom's came up with the Bloom's taxonomy, and it's been revised multiple times over the years. But let's go ahead and look at it. You can see there's some of the old ones, and now he uses terms such as creating, evaluating. Well, he doesn't, he's dead, but RIP, but analyzing, applying, understanding, knowledge. These are, that's the old side. This is the new side. You may see schools still using, I lost my cursor, hold on there, whoops. You may, go back. Well, not gonna do it, hold on. Go back. There we go. You may see schools sometimes using these because they were so embedded, and if the school's just a little bit behind, which can happen, but you may see them this way. Either or, as long as you kind of get the concept, I think that's the most important thing. But let's try again. There we go. And I don't think we need all that, so it's a little slow. My goodness gracious. Let's see, can we start from there? Yeah. All right, the first level on Bloom's is remembering. Used to be kind of referred to as knowledge, if you noticed on there. And this is basically when the learner is able to recall, restate, and remember learned information. This could be, if you're writing objectives, things such as having them, list, described, identify, retrieve, name, locate, find. Can you recall information? That's the first level of Bloom's, remembering. I used to teach middle school, and we did something called History Bowl. A lot of that is just simple recalling of information. It was, can you name it? Can you retrieve the information up here? That's the first level of Bloom's. And you might write an objective like this, like I mentioned World War I earlier. So I might have something like, students will list the 4 causes of World War I. Boom, boom, boom. That's Bloom's taxonomy. That's the base level. That's that big one at the bottom. You Here's a whole bunch of other things that you might see. And then, you know, you might say, as you can see, there's actually, sorry, it's driving me nuts. I lost my cursor. But if you look down there, you'll see some potential assessments that might work. Quiz, definition worksheets. Tests have a lot of basic recall type information. Actually, I think our quiz in our test in here for Ed 500, I mean, that was Ed 500. Ed 200 was actually basically a recall type thing. It was just to make sure that you knew the terms and you kind of could associate with them. So that's just, you know, there's nothing wrong with this level. Actually, this level is very, 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 very important. And it's the Jeopardy level, if you think about it. It's the knowledge, it's the base. So it's making sure that you know things. There's some other words that you can actually associate it with it if you're writing lesson plans, you know, listen, group, associate, recite. It's good stuff. So that's remembering. You know, make a story map, make a timeline, you know, such and such, make a, or, you know, make a poem, recite a poem. The next level is understanding. And that's a little different than, you know, that knowledge or that remembering. The learner grasps the meaning of information by interpreting and translating what has been learned. Um, it's a little, you know, you're getting a little closer to critical thinking when you're interpreting things, you know, summarize, paraphrasing, classifying. Um, can you explain ideals and concepts, things like that? You know, restate, identify, discuss, retell, translate. You know, that's the understanding. That's a nice, I like that that translate one. That might be just something like if you can reword it into your own words. That's an activity. Actually, I'm thinking of my son, he had to do that the other night. He had to take a line from something and reword it or translate it into his own words. This to reflect an understanding. That's the next level of balloons. And as you can see, there's a whole nice list. And by the way, I'm going to point this out. Sometimes some of these verbs may kind of float between different levels. There's nothing wrong with that. Also, some of the assignments, just because you're given a quiz, there's different types of quizzes and there's different types of questions on quizzes that could fall into multiple categories. So as far as an assignment goes. And there's some other words that maybe you could use in your objectives, you know, describe. Students will be able to report blah, 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 blah. Students will review blah, 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 by blah, 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 blah. Something along those lines. So that's your objectives. And I know you all haven't done too much objective writing yet. So we're going to do an activity with like this online actually this week. I'm sorry, I'll explain it in a little bit. Anyway, give me an idea, estimate, they all work. It all works fine. All right. And there's some other things that you can do, potential activities and all. And by the way, I'll post this up. This is not, by the way, I don't want to give, you know, I think you've probably already noticed it. This is not my PowerPoint. It was one that I liked because it had the revised. I'm on an educational site and they sometimes send us nice PowerPoints. Actually, I believe this was made by a British person because if you notice, all the S's are where Z's would normally be. But anyway, understanding, there's some other activities that you may like. Make a cartoon strip is one that sticks out. It's just, you want to show the understanding. So we basically went from remembering to understanding. The next is applying. Students make use of information in a context different from the one in which it was learned. So you basically are going to transfer what you've learned and you're going to execute it or bring it out and apply it. So let's just go right over here. You know, maybe you're going to talk about something and students are going to paint something that's reflecting on that or illustrate something. Or if you're talking, I'm on a World War I kick a little bit, maybe you're going to create or illustrate a propaganda poster about the Army recruitment or something like that. Construct an argument based on something. Draw, interview someone, and then apply that, you know, transcribe it. Calculate. These are all good words, and that's the next level in Bloom's. Applying. And as you can see, there's some other things. Presentations might fall in there. Maybe you're researching something and you're doing a book report and you want to apply the knowledge that you learned from it or reflect that you understand it. You know, they're starting to kind of blend in together. And there's some more. Construct a model, make a diorama. Might be something that you understand. Maybe it's the food chain. That's a very popular one, I believe, in elementary. Maybe you're going to make some sort of like life cycle. I think my son and I did one a few years. Oh, I'm sorry, my son did it. I didn't help him much. Anyway, I don't know why that made me laugh, but anyway, I did help him. But he had to do a life cycle of a whale shark, and it was actually kind of neat. But he had to apply that he knew the stages, and he did. He had to present it. So you got that. That's Bloom's again, applying the knowledge. Analyzing, you're getting a little farther up here now. You're going to compare, you're going to contrast, you're going to organize, you're going to outline. Outlining is something I don't know. Sometimes I don't see it as much in note taking as once upon a time, but outlining is very categorized. I'm assuming everyone knows how to outline. It's something that you can break down and look at how things are constructed and actually deconstructed as it's on there. I'm pointing at it like you can see me pointing at it. So analyzing, breaking things down into parts. I don't know if we can see. I'm actually thinking, I don't see it on there, but some sort of graph or chart, a Venn diagram might even get into this a little bit. T-charts, maybe even webs. I think some of the word webs might get into this a little bit, and you can analyze it and break it down. Abstracts do this. As you can see, there's a whole bunch. You can, debating. Debating can fall into a lot of different categories. It's going to be in a lot of, and it depends how you construct a debate and organize the debate. But you can see appraise. These are all the words that are associating with analysis. And when you're thinking about writing your objectives, what I'm trying to get to is when you're doing your lesson planning a little farther down the road, Bloom's is not a bad place to look to for looking for verbiage, especially for what the students are going to be doing. Like students will compare and contrast the United States and China's economic systems by creating a line graph. That might be something that that's how you got to think about Bloom's a little bit. Oh, look, I mentioned Venn diagram and I forgot it was on here. Ha ha ha. Yes. So anyway, as you can see, there's the flow charts. That's a really good one too. I know a lot of elementary school teachers like the flow charts, and I know a lot of language arts teachers like the flow charts, or a lot of elementary teachers who are teaching language arts like the flow chart for critical stages. You may characterize actions in a book. Again, this is just analyzing is breaking it down into more smaller components. I do this, if you're in social studies, we kind of do this with the inquiry-based learning. You might even break things down into the 3 questions, and then you kind of look at things from these different points of view. Evaluating, learner makes decisions based on in-depth reflection, criticisms, and assessments. This is getting, you're getting there now. You're up in that critical thinking. This is hypothesis. You're going to have a hypothesis or a thesis. You're going to critique, you're going to actually make decisions, and you're going to actually, this is a tougher one for a lot of students. This is the top, man. This is where you're getting critical thinking. You got to be willing to take a stand on some stuff with that hypothesis or critiquing another person's ideas or work, especially if it's one of your cohort. So, judging. You get into this a little bit with social studies fair, science fair, because you're going to have to create a hypothesis or a thesis. You got to present, which is kind of, I know lower down, you're applying that knowledge, but you may in a science fair do an experiment. That's where your labs get into play a little bit. So you might monitor something and you might have to take notes. So this is kind of bringing it all together. And there you go. There's some of the words. Again, I've mentioned debate pops up here and there a lot, and that is something that does come up. So you might do an evaluation. It might be a persuasive speech or a persuasive paper. Might be one way. You're taking a position. And I think one thing you're going to find with students, I think for human beings in general, it's hard for students sometimes to take a position on something because it's kind of scary because they don't want to hurt other people's feelings. But it's like I used to always tell my students, no one should hold it against you. And sometimes you just need to put what you really think. If it's well-reasoned, I never, in social studies, whether I agreed with it or not, if I was grading something and I thought the reasons were valid or they constructed a well argument, I would never hold it against them. That's what I told them. I mean, that's just, I think, being a fair teacher. So, this is that higher end, especially some of you high school teachers. I mean, this is where you want to get to. And of course, this is also where you want to get to if you're in elementary. Of course, it just depends. There's different barometers of success, I know, and related to the different grades. Ranking is a good one, but don't just rank them. A rank can be a list also that was way down at the bottom. I would make students rank things, but then they would have to justify it. One example I used to do, I had something called the periodic chart of dictators, uh, despots and despised, and it actually gave skulls to all these horrible people. But the students were really interested in it, and we would actually sometimes go through and actually, rank who we thought was, like, I hate to say it, the worst person and why. Or maybe a better way I should explain that is they would have to justify whether they thought the number of skulls were correct or not. And just to be on the positive, we also had one that was on the nice people and the good people, and we would also have to give that, they gave them nothing, so we would just do like little hearts or angels or something, and they would have to justify why they gave so many and rank who they thought. We did a whole March Madness thing on one of those charts, like who was the most beloved person one year, at the end of the year, because for some reason we didn't have snow days, and I remember we had to debate. They had to write a persuasive paper, and students had to vote and take positions on how that all worked out. And by the end, I think we ended up with like Amelia Earhart versus Buddha, and Amelia Earhart was, they felt, the most admired person ever. I actually was proud of them for that in some ways, because I don't think they were voting for who they liked the best. They actually voted it based on who they thought had articulated everything the best. So, and that was actually in 7th grade. So, students can get there. And there's some other things and some other examples. I will have this PowerPoint up, and I will have some charts up also. And I kept talking like that was the one, but there's also creating. And again, it's kind of the same things: planning, producing, inventing, devising, making. Can you do things? Can you take it to that next step and make it your own? And as you can see, predict what's going to happen next, a very popular language arts technique. Devise, compile information. As you can see there, film, song, you can create something. This creates very high. This is kind of getting into the Gardner a little bit. I haven't even mentioned Gardner. You all did something a few weeks ago on him. But, this might be getting into meeting those different types of Gardner multiple intelligence. So you might get the Bloom's Gardner, like, molding happening a little bit. Maybe students are going to construct a film, and obviously there's some creativity into that. And maybe you might have them, they have to write a script. There might be some artwork involved in that. There might be some interviewing, which might deal with interpersonal type skills. It's all coming together. And that's what you got to think about as a teacher. And at some point, it just all slows down. But anyway, there's Bloom's. Again, Bloom's questions. When you start seeing this, Bloom should be used purposely to achieve well-defined goals. It's a classification of thinking on levels of complexity. You should use all of these levels, as that's basically what it's getting here. You don't want to get stuck into one. You want to think about all those different levels when you're writing objectives. You want to vary. And of course, if you're introducing something, you're probably going to be on the lower level a little bit. And then as the unit or lesson progresses, you might get into a little bit of a higher one. And as I mentioned, there's higher level and lower level questions or objectives. And you can see it's kind of breaking it down. I'm not going to repeat myself there, but it's all about preparation and what the lower level questions are for and what the higher level questions are for. So I always just kind of think about them in that the lower level ones are kind of just setting the groundwork, so to speak, and that base level stuff that you have to get to the higher level. Questions for remembering. There's some: what happened after, how many, what is. Questions for understanding: can you explain, can you write your own words, how can you explain. And by the way, I should expand. This is where sometimes when I wish we were face to face. This is kind of getting into that inquiry-based types of thinking. I always think you want to frame your lessons around a set of questions, and that's what these are kind of doing. Do you know of another instance where, in terms of applying? Analyzing, can you, what are some or the problems of, that's a great one. Why did changes occur? You know, you're breaking it down again into the smaller parts. Evaluation, judge the value of, is there a better solution? What are the consequences? That's, you're kind of getting the critical thinking type stuff. And can you design? How many ways can you? Can you create a new and unusual use for? And that's the Bloom. There's some sources. I know I'm kind of babbling a little bit. I will do a favor. I will make sure that this is posted up on Sakai. And I'm sorry, it's that rainy day today. I kind of noticed I've been going in and out on the darkness. That could be good or bad. But I will make sure that the PowerPoint is posted. I will make sure that there is a Bloom chart. If you are into Blooms, there are a lot of times Blooms wheels that you can buy. I think they're really nice. I kind of cruise through the end there where you develop questions to frame your lesson plans around. Blooms is great for that. It's great for developing objectives. I use it a lot for objective writing myself because I like those verbs that you can put in there. It's very easy when you start to write objectives to kind of get locked into students will know, students will do, and that's, don't do that. Use your Blooms, use your good verbs. Strong verbs really make strong lesson plans. I might coin that phrase. That's actually a good way to say that. But with all that being said, that's it. Let me stop the share. Again, if you have any questions, there is going to be some, the activities will be posted. I might do something with Blooms probably one of the weeks. I'd like you all maybe to come up with some objectives. We'll do that on one of the flip grids or something like that. Don't worry about it. I know I mumbled that somewhere in there and got tongue tied. But really, you just have to worry about what's posted right now. Don't forget your service learning. I mentioned this a couple weeks ago, and you all remember stuff better than I do a lot of times because I say a lot. I might have one last potential service learning that I think you can do. Most of them I know have been distance-based. I'm going to hopefully have that information early next week. That will be the early around election day, November 2nd. I will make sure to post something. If I do, I can't guarantee it. I did also get something related to Washington County tutoring. If you're interested in that, I know I had said something about Berkeley County tutoring, and some of you took me up on that. So hopefully that's working out for everyone, and that should do it. So I hope everyone has a great day, and I'm going to go ahead and stop filming and call it a day. Talk to you later. Bye.